And a good spiritual morning to you once again. Thanks for joining us today for a quick chat. And of course, our morning cup of coffee.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us. We hope you're having a wonderful day.
Absolutely. And it's a big feast day today in the life of our church and for our parish, because we are Annunciation of the Theotokos, right? Annunciation. And so today, March 25th, a huge feast day in the life of our church. We remember the Archangel Gabriel announcing, right, the good news to the Virgin Mary that she's going to give birth to the Christ. And so a huge feast day all over.
Yeah,
course,
many
world.
churches have this.
Absolutely.
Have this as their patron or their feast day of their parish. Yep.
And so we thought we would talk about it a little bit for today, and maybe something that what can we take home?
Yeah, there's a sweetness to this holiday. Yeah,
right. So first off, why is it March 25th?
Because this is what you ask your Sunday school students.
Right,
because
ask
it's
your kids.
9 months before Christmas.
December 25th, right? We're announcing this is the Virgin Mary is going to give birth, right, to the Christ child.
Yeah.
So it's got to be 9 months before his birth. So that's why people say, well, why is it March 25th?
That's when we remember it.
That's why. It's
a calendar thing.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense. And but what we're
caught me
remembering,
off guard there for a second.
I
I was
know,
like, wait,
right? Well,
what?
I just thought of it. Maybe we should tell people, well, why is it on March 25th? It's
Got
pretty
it.
obvious. Sometimes we don't do math and figure out that it's 9 months. But just this idea that the Archangel Gabriel comes to tell the Virgin Mary she's going to give birth to the Christ child, but she has to respond, right? She has to say yes, right? Behold the handmaid of the Lord, be it done to me according to your word. So this idea of how we hear God's calling, because she's being called to do something. It's it's not a little calling, it's a pretty big calling.
Yeah.
And how we hear God's call, and then how do we respond to God's
Because we
call?
have free will.
Absolutely. She could say no.
Yeah.
She could say,
A lot of us say no all the time.
yeah. Well, now you're skipping ahead again. Spoilers. I don't think that's any big secret.
But it's lovely. She's young. She's
She's a teenager.
She's a teenager. She is scared, I would assume, by what the angel is saying. And like you said, the beauty of her saying whatever God wants. Right? The faith
Absolutely.
of this person. The faith. Yeah.
Sure. So I think it's this idea that, number one, do we hear God's call? Right? And because she's living a life dedicated to God, right? Remember that she's dedicated to the temple. On November 21st, every year, we remember her entrance into the temple. So Joachim and Anna, they give birth to the Theotokos. They promise that if God blesses them with a child, they will dedicate that child to God. And so when she turns around 3, 4 years old, somewhere in there, they take her as a little baby, a little toddler, into the temple, and they leave her there. So she's raised in the temple. So she's raised with this life
Of faith.
And holiness, where of course she's going to hear God's call, right? That's the first step. The first step is, for us, are we living a life where there's any sense of faith and holiness, so that when God calls us, we can at least hear it?
Yeah, I like this. It's following our idea of silence from the last couple of videos. Like, Are we paying attention? And when we hear God's call, what is our answer?
Well, because a lot of times people say, I don't really feel God's presence, or I don't hear his voice, or I don't. And that's for a number of reasons. Usually you're not listening, and there's so much noise in your life and distraction in your life, you can't hear. He's trying to talk to you, but day-to-day life gets in the way. And so I don't make him a priority. So he's calling me constantly to wonderful and beautiful things, and I just don't hear his voice. So I think that's the first step.
Part.
Trying to be able to quiet our lives a little bit and refocus and prioritize God more, so that we can communicate with him. And it's not just me asking him for stuff, but me also listening and hearing his call, because he might be calling me to do certain things.
And for most of us, we're not going to experience it, as obviously the feast day talks about, with the Virgin Mary experiencing God's call coming from
the Archangel Gabriel's probably not going to visit you.
Yeah. Sorry, we're not in
bodily
that holiness.
Form.
Yeah.
No.
But there's a lot of times where most of us have a fork in the road. We are trying to make decisions all the time.
Sure.
We are trying to make big decisions even in our lives. Do I do this or do I that? Do I do that? And do we put God in that conversation? Do we try to figure out, well, what would my faith tell me to do? Does that make sense? Is that the right way to say that? Kind
sure.
of. I mean,
no, it makes sense.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We all have those many, many, many times a week. What am I supposed to do here?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
big decisions. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's not even about, I mean, it's about decision making too, but it's just about day-to-day life.
Okay.
It's about trying to find your way in the world, trying to find your path, and trying to find, fulfillment too. How can I be fulfilled in this life? Some sense of peace, some sense of joy, some sense of happiness, right? And God has that kind of framework. I wouldn't say that he has a plan that we have to follow because we have free will.
Right.
But he's sort of saying, hey, take a left up there and it'll be better for you. And he's constantly saying, hey, take a right up there, veer a little bit left up there. Hey, slow down. Hey, stop. Hey, speed up.
Yeah.
And we're like, wait, I don't hear anything. We're just,
we're just going.
And we're just going. And we're plowing ahead and we're making mistakes left and right. And then we wonder, well, why is life so hard? Well, life's going to be hard. But we want to try to hear God's voice in all of that. So the first thing is prioritizing that and trying to hear God's voice and not saying, well, and when I talk about this, the nuts and bolts of it is spending time and talking with him and listening to him. And we're terrible about that.
Yeah.
If we can squeeze out a couple of minutes on a good day, we're happy with that. And think about how sad that is. Think about how sad, how far we've lowered the bar. Just that I have to tell most people, if you can get 1 or 2 minutes in the morning and you can get 1 or 2 minutes at night, you're doing great. That's not great. It's pretty bad. I mean, you've got 24 hours a day.
You're trying to get them to take a first step.
Take that first step. But the point I'm trying to make is you spend 8 hours sleeping.
Yeah.
And then you can't spend 8 minutes praying.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what's the priority in your life?
Yeah.
And saying, I want to spend more time reading my Bible. So I'm reading his word. I want to spend more time talking to him and listening and more time in prayer. Like there's more things we could be doing. So we're building that relationship up so we can hear his voice. So I think that's the first thing.
Yeah. And forgive me, I do this to him all the time.
Go.
I'm going to just, about 15, 20 years ago, I remember hearing this and I thought it really made an impact on me. It was a gentleman who said that he and his wife were presented a huge opportunity, but he wasn't sure if it was right for their family.
Right.
And so in his message, I'll do the father version, not my version.
The short version?
The short version.
The Cliff Notes?
He said, well, when people have stress in their life, they could either go like golfing all day and say, this is really stressful. I'm gonna relax and I'll figure it out after I golf or whatever your thing might be. And he said, or maybe I pray about it for an hour and say, okay, God, I have a big decision. So we try, sometimes not only do we not hear God's voice, but we distract ourselves in the moment instead of coming to God and saying, I need a little.
We find other ways to enable us to make the decision.
Right. Thank you.
But
that's it.
Right. Well, no, and that's true. And there's
or we watch a movie or like, it doesn't have to be, but
we numb ourselves or we find another way to sort of say, okay, I mean, like it or not, you have to make the decision, whatever the decision is. You're saying they had a big life decision. So it's like they didn't turn to God and say, well, God, what do you want me to do? Or what should I do?
Yeah.
Or so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about put God in the equation, turn to God. But here's the thing, you always have decisions to make. We might not all have big life decisions right now that we have to make, but you're making decisions all the time.
Yeah.
And it's more just saying, God's in my life. Can we really claim God's in our life? And that we have a relationship with him. If you say, I have a relationship with Christ, how good is that relationship? Like, what's that relationship look like? How much time do you spend together?
Yeah, we want to walk with him through life.
Think about like a human relationship. If someone said, you have this human relationship, maybe it's a romantic relationship. It's a bad metaphor, but let's say you're dating somebody and you want to say, this is how strong my relationship is. What is a therapist going to say? They're going to ask you questions. Oh, really? How well do you communicate? How often do you talk to each other? How much time do you spend together? How often do you go out together and spend time together?
What kind of time do you spend together?
Right.
Yeah.
Like they're going to ask you all these questions. You're going to say, oh, wow, I guess on a scale of 1 to 10, my relationship is like a 3. And oftentimes that's pretty much our relationship with Christ. Yeah, I know he's there and he's there whenever I want him to be there. Yeah. So whenever I want him, I kind of take him off the shelf and I, put him here and then we have a little relationship and then he goes back on the shelf. And that's not much of a good relationship. Yeah. And so the first thing is to hear God's call. Like today we're talking about the Virgin Mary hearing, firsthand this proclamation that's announcing from the archangel, you have to open yourself up to making God a priority and saying, well, I'm listening. Lord, I'm listening. Talk to me. And then it's a matter of now when you get the response, say yes, right? Now it's sort of saying, okay. Then people will say, well, how do I know if I'm asking God for some guidance because I have some decisions to make? How do I know how do I know what's his voice and what's not his voice? And that's about praying about something. That's about also talking to somebody about something. We keep coming back to confession, but that's part of the purpose of having a spiritual father, is to help you discern that. What is God's voice? What is a temptation? And what is God's plan?
Yeah, sometimes we get tunnel vision, and the spiritual father can help us see it more clearly.
Sure. When in doubt, for those of you that are refusing to go to confession and have a relationship with your priest and get guidance, and so you want the sort of general prescription for everything, when in doubt, the harder path is usually God's voice. Usually the easier way out, the easier way out, that ain't the right way. Usually the harder way, that's just usually.
But that's where the growth comes.
Yeah. I mean, and so we have to open ourselves up to hearing God's voice in our life, build our relationship up with him, and then try to hear his voice. And when we do hear that calling to something, then try to say yes. And like you said early on, we say no to God a lot. And we have to stop doing that.
Yeah.
If nothing else, as a take home for the video and thinking about Annunciation, just sort of say to yourself, look how the Virgin Mary says yes. She knows that's not going to be an easy path. It's a horrible path. It's a difficult path, a path that she could be killed and ostracized for. Mm-hmm. But she says yes. And so for us in our life, how can I say yes to God more? I know God's invited me to come to his house, and I turn him down quite a bit. 3 times a week right now, I'm turning him down. Maybe I could say one yes to God. I know God's written me, his word for me to read, to get to know him better. And he's asking me to read it every day. And every day I say no. Maybe today I could say yes and read one sentence. He wants to talk to me every morning. He wants to talk to me every night. And I'm hanging up on him, every day. I'm not talking.
Just not hitting. Yep.
Say yeah. Say, I look at my phone and I think it's spam risk, right? And I'm not answering it. You know what? Pick up the phone. Every once in a while, try to say yes to God and build that relationship up with him so that you and we all can get closer to Christ and do that each and every day.
Amen.